Awesome. So we have a pretty balanced, like everyone's very awesome team versus like some experience, a little bit more, and then captain of the team from Amazon internship. So I'll explain how the activity works. This is fun, like you guys can kind of be like a little bit rowdy. The coaches we're talking about, like out of all the schools we've done events and presentations at, like the CMU students are the most like, I feel like you guys are working so hard. I see everyone taking notes on the computer. I saw so many people multitasking as well while taking notes. I saw someone working on a project with one hand and taking notes on the other hand. So this is the part where like you can kind of have fun. And then also like, even though you're not on stage, there will be a timer. So actually think about how you would answer the question too, because then you'll see like if your answer would be considered a good answer. So this activity is specifically designed for the behavioral interview. In the behavioral interview, who here has like heard of it before? You can quickly wave your hand. So I assume most of you have, and then you'll hear from the panel up here, like some of them already done it before. The behavioral interview is really important because it's actually the building block of every interview format. Because even in a slide deck, you will be asked follow-up questions, right? After you present, you have to talk. If you do a whiteboarding, they'll ask you questions, you have to explain. If you do an app critique, you have to explain. So the behavioral question, the philosophy behind it, is the building block for every single interview. It doesn't matter if you're going to be a UX designer, UX engineer, PM, TPM. Doesn't matter what job you do, the behavioral question is one of the most important. The behavioral question is also part of the phone screen. So for those of you who don't know what the phone screen is, the phone screen is basically a more easy version of a behavioral question with the recruiter. Obviously, the skills will be a little bit different because for a recruiter, you don't have to go as deep into your UX project. A lot of the questions is just walking through experience. Usually the recruiter cares more about like, is your education correct? Things like sponsorship, right? We talked about, they'll confirm with you on the phone. They'll confirm like these things, and then they'll ask you a little bit about why you're interested in the company. Some recruiters at an internship level, to save time for the company, will basically do it almost like a little behavioral interview. So they'll be like, hey, could you maybe show me one project in a portfolio really quickly? Explain it to me in 5 minutes. This is pretty likely. Like LinkedIn has done it before, Indeed has done it before, but it's like a small chance, right? So most of the time, the phone screen is very easy. It's just on the phone and you chat it out. The behavioral questions that we're talking about, like we have someone who went through the Amazon interview. So this, at the company, this is where like the culture gets evaluated. Are you a good fit? Do you know the leadership principles? We got other things like at different companies, like maybe they'll ask you like a specific scenario where like, hey, if you were to improve this product for us, what would you do, right? So there's a wide range of possibilities, but usually for each company, there's only a set possibility, right? Like when we're doing the interview prep for Amazon, usually it's like we know 90% of the questions you'll get asked. It just depends on how well you can do. So it's almost like an open note quiz is how you want to think about behavioral interviews. Of course, there is the most standard form of interview, which is a portfolio review. The tip here I want to add is like when we say portfolio review, never use your website directly. Always show a slide deck. So I've noticed a lot of students like sometimes forget or they feel like they don't need to, like they can show their website. Usually it is standard expectation to show a slide deck, not a website, unless for some companies they specifically instruct you to show it from your website. So just make sure you clarify with the recruiter. It never hurts to ask, and the recruiter's on your side. And then you have the final round interview. At an intern level, some companies skip this. So for example, at Amazon, they don't have a separate final round. But for companies like Apple and on the top of my head, on an intern level, I think Apple has the longest one. Microsoft also has a 4 to 5 hour interview. We call this on-site, but it doesn't mean you're actually on-site. It's like a virtual on-site. So it's one deck and then usually 3 to 4 rounds of behavioral interview. So it's almost like a master of everything you've done, but you do it again and it's back to back, right? So it's quite exhausting. And then there are UX technical interviews, which usually compose of take-home challenges, whiteboard challenges, or app critique. Almost all companies nowadays do whiteboard challenge. It's almost the gold standard of UX technical review. I really, really love whiteboard challenges. I love teaching it. I'll do a demo later. Once you get the hang of it, you'll realize a whiteboard interview is actually like one of the best ways for a designer to show off their design skills. But it's like a test, right? The way you want to think about interviews is like, being a good interviewer doesn't really mean you're a good designer, right? The skill sets are kind of different. So think of it sort of like taking like the SATs or the ACTs, right? Just because you're good at math doesn't mean like you don't have to study for the math portion because they ask questions in a specific way. And that's a take-home design challenge. It's less and less popular. Google used to do this. So when I was applying for an internship, they used to do this. It was a 5-day take-home. They don't do it anymore, so they swapped the take-home challenge for a whiteboard exercise. That's more standard with like mid-level or senior level hiring process. So current companies that still do design challenge take-home, Duolingo does it, Tesla does it. Tesla has a 5-day version very similar to Google's. And then you have App Critique. App Critique is its own thing. It's very similar to a whiteboard challenge. They use similar processes, but rather than starting from scratch, you're sort of critiquing an existing product to showcase your skill set. So today we'll have the activity to practice on behavioral, and on the technical side, the whiteboarding is the most important, so we'll practice on the whiteboard. And then of course, if you do have specific interviews in the future, you need more help, you can definitely reach out to us, but also one thing I recommend is really be careful about developing bad practices. So something I've noticed with a lot of students is like, they get caught in a bad loop, and it's not really because their skill set is not as strong. Like I know Namita was sharing about this earlier, but Namita's a great designer, and I have really high hopes for her in the future. But when she joined UXGO, she was struggling, she was stressed because she's like, I keep failing interviews even though I keep getting them. I wouldn't really say, like Namita and Arjun gave me a lot of credit saying how I helped them, and like I really appreciate them giving me the credit, but in my own opinion, I give the credit back to them because I think it's just me telling them how to develop the right practices, and they're very smart, they learn fast. So a lot of times when you're siloed by yourself, maybe you watch a YouTube video or read an article, but the person that wrote that doesn't have that skill specifically applied to you. So someone might say a tip like use the STAR method for behavioral interview, right? You've probably heard the STAR method before somewhere, right? For 90% of the people, the STAR method is terrible. Like if you use the STAR method, usually it hurts you in behavioral like way more than it helps. And then when Namita was doing behavioral, she kept using the STAR method, and for her, like a lot of students, it's not actually a good principle to follow because you run over time, you give the wrong information, and things like that. So make sure when you're practicing, just check in early. Like don't feel like you have to do this by yourself. Really make sure you avoid developing bad practices because it's like muscle memory. Like if you develop those bad practices, it's way harder later on to change it. So this part portfolio we mentioned, right? Just make sure you create a deck. A lot of students forget to do this. And this is like just a quick like call out. So I'm also like writing a book on some of these topics we're talking about today. And then if anyone's like kind of like into graphic design or visual design, I'm still looking for someone to partner up for like a book cover. So you can also reach out to me if you want your design to be featured on the interview book.